Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Caitlin Wojak. I'm from MSU Extension, and I'm joined today by Jude Berry from the Michigan State University Center for Regional Food Systems and Janine LaPrade from Corporation for a Skilled Workforce. Today is the third of a series of webinars and publications that report on findings of the Michigan 2019 Local and Regional Food System Workforce Assessment. The first webinar on December 12th provided a broad summary of findings. The second webinar, which was just 2 weeks ago, provided an overview of the sectors and jobs in Michigan's food systems and a look at employment, wages, and future growth. Today's webinar will provide more detail on results of our employer survey to better understand the challenges and opportunities for hiring in the local and regional food system. Our final webinar on February 13th will provide an update on the training and educational opportunity scan that was conducted. All the webinars are recorded and published on the project website along with detailed reports for each area of the research. If you Google MSU Workforce Assessment, you will find these resources. So to conduct this assessment, the MSU Center for Regional Food Systems collaborated with Kalamazoo Valley Community College and MSU Extension to form a project steering team and contracted with a Corporation for a Skilled Workforce to examine the local and regional food system workforce landscape in Michigan. As a team, we'd particularly like to acknowledge and express appreciation to all the stakeholders and employers that contributed their time and knowledge to this research, as well as our partner Rachel Baer from Kalamazoo Valley Community College, who isn't able to join us today. This work was made possible through funding from the W.K. Kellogg Foundation and the Kalamazoo Valley Community College. So I'll just begin by providing a brief review of background information and methods. Local and regional food systems development work in Michigan strives to improve lives and provide equitable outcomes for all. It is rooted in community and seeks through those communities to improve health through better healthy food access and support economic development through increased sales for Michigan local and regional food businesses, which in turn can support better jobs. We are focused on building collaboration infrastructure around the goals of the Michigan Good Food Charter. Over time, it has been increasingly important to better understand the food system workforce to ensure it can continue to grow and strengthen communities. So the goals of this research were to better understand the local and regional food system workforce and identify challenges and opportunities, and also to identify possible gaps and opportunities in education and training. As discussed in our previous webinar and debated broadly, local and regional food systems can be defined in a number of ways. For the purposes of this workforce assessment, the local and regional food system encompass organizations that produce, process, and/or distribute food from Michigan that is available to Michigan consumers, and also organizations that support this system. This definition was created by the project steering team for the purpose of providing boundaries for this work. So project research areas included a food systems job scan, a survey of local and regional food system businesses with follow-up stakeholder interviews, a scan and review of other food system workforce research, as well as a scan of food systems training and education opportunities. This webinar will focus on the survey of local and regional food system businesses and stakeholder interviews, identifying opportunities, skills needed, and areas of future growth. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jude to dive into the findings.
Thanks very much, Caitlin. As Caitlin mentioned, today we will be looking at what local and regional food business said about the workforce, and I'm going to share a bit about who responded to our survey and interviews, and to share some of those results. The specific goals of the local and regional food system business survey were to better understand, first of all, the jobs that are anticipated will be available. Secondly, the hiring and retention challenges that businesses face. And thirdly, to look at some of the education and training needs that businesses would like to see met. As with our other areas of this work, we have focused our attention on the diverse number of industries and within those occupations that span the Michigan local and regional food system. As those that have been on our past webinars will know, those core industry sectors that our work sought to gather data from were food production, farm inputs, food manufacturing and processing, wholesale distribution, and food retail sales and service. This selection of core industries was supported and influenced by food systems literature of work done here in Michigan and in other states. More information on that can be found in our report. In addition to the core industries, allied industries associated with local and regional food systems were included. The allied industries are economically related but aren't directly involved in the life cycle of the food product. You can see from this slide that these include a range of different allied industries and occupations, including waste management and food recovery, education and training providers, advocacy groups, financial institutions, and others. The survey was sent to approximately 2,000 individuals and organizations compiled from an existing distribution list that we had here at the MSU Center for Regional Food Systems, that MSU Extension had, and also we used an additional 116 businesses obtained from the Michigan Bureau of Labor Market Information and Strategic Initiatives. We conducted this survey in the spring of 2019. And we received 143 responses for a total survey response rate of about 7%, which we acknowledge is rather low, but we considered the findings that we had valuable to share. The slide here shows where the respondents were located. And as you see on this slide as well, the survey gathered perceptions from respondents on 3 specific areas: current job openings, hiring and retention, skills and qualifications for their staff, and respondents' use of and need for additional training for their workers. So this slide shows the spread of who responded to our survey in terms of sectors represented. The low response rate affected the mix of organizations who responded, with overrepresentation in food production, retail, and not-for-profit organizations. Overall, caution should be taken in generalizing these survey responses across food system subsectors, as some were poorly represented. However, as I mentioned, we did think the messages that we heard were still worthwhile sharing. And in addition to that, to enhance the results of the survey, we used an additional 10 food system employers who participated in follow-up interviews. Interview candidates were selected from survey respondents who volunteered to participate, and also from a short list of recommended employers that were procured in some initial key informant interviews. This slide shows the business structures of our respondents. Not-for-profit organizations, an example of which would be 501c3s, were the top reported business structures, probably as food support, advocacy, and community organizations made up a large proportion of survey respondents. For-profit LLCs made up a quarter of respondents, and sole proprietors made up slightly less than 10%. There were a fair number of educational institutions, as well as representation from local and regional and federal government agencies. A few respondents represented a blend of for and not-for-profit organizations known as low-profit limited liability companies, also known as L3Cs. Our respondents told us how they employed with respect to year-round, seasonal, full-time and or part-time offerings. Smaller businesses in this survey had the greatest representation, with 42% having 4 or fewer full-time employees and 57% reporting 4 or fewer part-time employees. Most organizations had a mix of full and part-time workers, with only 14% of respondents hiring only full-time employees and only 10% hiring only part-time staff. So when we look at the seasonal versus the year-round employment, most respondents said that they employed 4 or fewer seasonal employees. Seasonal employment can include both migrant workers and local resident workers. Employers interviewed most frequently said that they employed local residents for seasonal work. And this is likely indicative of the sample of people that we interviewed. As we wanted to point out that in 2013 enumeration study of farm workers, there were some 50,000 migrant workers here in Michigan. And so we just want to acknowledge the sheer number of migrant workers here. Our interviews indicated that migrant workers tend to be employed by the larger food system entities, and we believe that we did not capture these larger businesses well in our survey. So now I'm going to hand over to Janine to provide our findings on job vacancies, hiring and retention, and training needs.
Great, thanks, Jude. Good afternoon, everyone. As far as the survey respondents reporting on their current job openings and their hiring and retention practices, we saw that almost 50% of the respondents had current job openings ranging from 1 to 20, with an average of just less than 5 openings. Survey respondents were also able to share a number of reasons for why they were having these job vacancies, and the top graph on the slide indicates where they were seeing some of these reasons. So, for example, the majority of these current job openings were due to replacing workers lost to attrition. We also saw that nearly 60% of respondents said that these openings were due to growth within their organization. And about 13% of respondents said they were filling job vacancies caused by retirement. From a future forward-looking perspective, 86% of the respondents expected to hire at least 1 new worker over the next 1 to 3 years, and only 14% expected to have no hiring needs at all. This next slide shows what the mix of current vacancies looks like across a range of food system jobs and sectors. You can see in this slide that there are a number of jobs, both across and within the local regional food systems. We have a number of jobs in the entry-level positions in the food service and food retail area. We also see there are a number of jobs in areas like crop production and farming roles, such as harvester, greenhouse operator, and head grower. When looking more closely at hiring retention challenges, we asked respondents to share a bit more about some of the trends they were seeing in terms of their experience with job applications and job applicants. And respondents overwhelmingly cited that they were feeling that they had an inability to provide competitive wages and benefits, especially in a very tight labor market. They also said that a number of people were showing up with limited workplace skills and prior work experience. 26% that said that they had applicants who were experiencing transportation issues, which was affecting both their ability to show up and be productive in their jobs. And then again, 19% reported that the lack of prior work experience was really hindering both the hiring and the retention of people in these jobs. As far as digging a little deeper into some of these hiring retention challenges and trying to explore with the employers, particularly in the interviews, what was really underlying some of this, many of the employers we spoke to indicated that they were concerned about losing candidates to the competition in their local area. And this was also compounded by just feeling like the lack of applicants was actually a lot smaller than they were hoping to see. And so this was particularly true in the case for food retail and food service employers we interviewed. And if you recall from the job scan data that we shared in a prior webinar, the retail sector was the area where we were requiring the most people, where we were employing a lot of people, and we also were paying people well below about $10 an hour. And so, as we mentioned during the earlier webinars, that Michigan according to the United Way Alice report, Michigan residents often need to make ends meet by earning more than this $10 per hour. And so this is an area that we're encouraging further discussion and exploration with employers and other stakeholders. Another reason given for some of these hiring and retention challenges was just the tight labor market and the implications of being in a tight labor market. The good news in that for many employers is that while they saw that they were having a difficult time with the competition, they also felt like it was that they were able to be more open to a diverse workforce. And they were also beginning to look more closely at how their workplaces and their practices are able to support people in feeling more included and doing a good job for their company. The third area we looked at was just trying to get underneath some of the challenges to providing competitive wages and offering benefits, which is often seen as a solution to addressing hiring and retention challenges. And we know from practice that this is often a very difficult commitment for many food and small businesses to make. However, we also know that exploring this solution more with businesses and workers is an important part of ensuring that local and regional food system jobs here in Michigan can help residents earn enough to make ends meet. When we looked more closely and talked with employers at the kinds of skills and qualifications they were requiring for these job openings, we saw that the levels of education requested in most job openings by employers reflected a typical rising progression in the level of education required from entry level to more senior level roles. We also saw that across the seniority levels, approximately 20 to 23% of survey respondents do not have any formal education requirements for those jobs in their companies. And this is shown in the lightest blue color on the graph that you're seeing. Respondents were also asked about additional industry certifications that they look for when hiring a candidate. And these certificates often focus on specific technical skills or knowledge that are required, many of which are mandated by both company policy and state law. So for example, we saw a number of employers indicating that certification in food safety and handling, most commonly ServSafe for handlers and managers, was cited time and again, and there were other more specific technical certifications that they were looking for. The survey also asked about what skills they're seeing are most difficult to find in new hires, and the top 3 skills that employers said are most difficult were in the areas of communication, work ethic, and reliability. In a prior webinar, we had a question about what work ethic might mean, and typically what we see when talking to employers about this, it also has to do with the ability for people to show up to work reliably, to be able to be engaged productively while they're there, and to be able to commit to work for a certain amount of time each week, and to be able to see somebody stay on the job for at least 3 months, which we know impacts businesses, especially small ones, if they're losing people from a turnover perspective more often than they'd like to see. We also asked employers about what they're doing in terms of when they can't find someone or the people that they need to with these kinds of basic skills. And they said that quite often they were looking to hire people that just didn't have some of these basic and technical skills, and that they were beginning to have to teach some of this on the job more often. And then in a number of cases, they said that they were just not doing any hiring until they could find a suitable candidate. The other thing we wanted to note was that in talking with employers about these experiences, a number of them did admit that having people or hiring people with less experience often enabled them to hire at a lower wage. When we asked employers about more specific training needs, the areas that popped up from the surveys and from the interviews included a focus on customer relations and services, and this skill set was really cutting across a range of businesses and sectors. We also saw the need for people with skills in the area of day-to-day operations, food handling, safety procedures, and sales and marketing, again, across a number of the sectors and jobs. And then specifically, sales and marketing training were needed in the area of food processing. And we also heard that machine operation, organic farming, safety procedures, and other trade skills were needed for the area of food production and business operations. From a managerial and supervisory training perspective, we also saw that a number of employers indicated that needing more professional development and leadership development for their managers and senior level staff was critical, especially for some of these smaller businesses. And there was also an indication that providing more opportunities for leadership development for staff to be more engaged in the community, and community boards and councils also came up as both a hiring and a retention tool. When we asked employers about what was getting in the way potentially of them hiring, what were some of the broader environmental factors in play, we heard that the access to capital and resources, especially for those that were trying to provide on-the-job training, was often a barrier. Obviously, their hiring and their ability to retain workers has a lot to do with where they are in terms of generating revenue and sales. A lot of them talked about trying to plan ahead and looking at not only current needs, but future needs. And then there were just broader factors such as public policy, technology, climate change, as well as just what's happening from an industry and market growth perspective that were all influencing their hiring and retention practices. When we asked employers about who they're partnering with to provide education and training opportunities to their workforce, the preponderance of respondents indicated that Michigan State University, across a number of different departments, was a key partner in supporting their workforce development efforts. We also saw that in addition to working with MSU, we also heard that a lot of employers are working with state associations such as the Michigan Farmers Market Association, the Michigan Restaurant Association, and the School Nutrition Association of Michigan to get access to education and training resources and programs for their workforce. Other institutions that were lifted up included four-year universities, a number of community colleges, and K-12 school districts. There was some mention of a number of state, federal, and local government-related resources, whether it be from the Department of Agriculture or from an economic and business development perspective, as well as a safety and health perspective. And then in a number of cases, we heard about some community-based resources and proprietary training opportunities that employers were accessing. We also included in our report for this a full list of training providers, and we'll be working toward developing, finalizing, and sharing an inventory of all of these education and training resources, which, as Caitlin noted, will be something we cover in the next webinar. So as far as how is this all adding up and what we're seeing as a result of these interviews and survey responses, there are a number of implications and potential next steps for this work. A number of them are highlighted here on the slide, and I'll just note more specifically that across the board, we heard an interest and a willingness to work more with other businesses and stakeholders, including education and training institutions and community partners, to really try to focus on a strategy and pulling together resources that would support the growth of a workforce in these areas, and that would really allow businesses to tie in some of their own production and processing innovation work with some of their workforce development growth needs. And so there's just, it seems, a lot of opportunity to support some cross-sector partnership work in this area and to really encourage more collaboration among employers, education and training providers, and other community partners. And now I'm going to turn it back to Caitlin.
Thanks, Janine. So we do have a little time for questions, and if you have a question that you haven't been able to enter in the Q&A pod, go ahead and do that. And it looks like we have a couple that we can address in the meantime if you have other ones that you'd like to enter. So one is, how much of the issue of reliability as one of those desired skills that was difficult to find was related to transportation, if you know? Someone can't help but wonder whether the two are related.
Yes, Caitlin, that's a great question. And I absolutely think we heard that not only transportation was affecting reliability, access to childcare is as well. And we also know that given the part-time nature of some of this work, when people are working more than one job in a week and in a day, it can also really impact reliability.
Thanks, Janine. So another question about the state associations as training partners. Are these trade organizations or government offices?
We saw that it was both, that there are a number of trade associations at the state level, and to some extent we see that regionally. So for example, I know on the west side of the state, there's a food processing association or group of employers there that are working together to come up with some workforce development solutions. And then we also see state level associations and government agencies providing supports and services to these companies.
Great, thank you. And one other, do we know whether the training providers are offering resources for the areas of greatest training needs that you mentioned? I don't know if you know that.
So it's, yeah, so I think from the education and training program inventory we've developed, we are seeing some alignment and some gaps. And we're hoping that through this next webinar, we'll be able to share more about where we're seeing the alignment and where we're seeing gaps, and that there's further work to do in different regions in particular where there might be an opportunity for either just tweaking some existing programs or potentially looking for investments in new programs that just aren't in place yet.
And just to add on to that, Janine, we did find in our job scan in the previous webinar that we reported, we shared that there are a significant portion of those employed in the local or regional food system tend to be from the high school level education, and so they're looking further at what high schools are offering and where the gaps are. There is also an area that we're identifying is certainly an area for further work, but also we are able to report on some of the programs that high schools are offering in the next webinar and the next report.
Excellent, thank you both. So it looks like we don't have any other outstanding questions, so I will close us out. And we just wanted to say thank you for joining us today. This webinar is recorded, and together with the reports on this work can be found on our project website. If you Google MSU Workforce Assessment, it should pop right up for you. We hope you'll be able to join us for the next webinar, where we will provide future further data on findings and an in-depth description of the workforce and training opportunities in Michigan's local and regional food system. So thanks again, and goodbye.